Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, Lamine Yamal shines against Inter Milan, but why would the Nerazzurri believe that they can take Barcelona back at the San Siro? PSG beat Arsenal 1-0 at the Emirates, but why might the Gunners have been better in this game than you realised? And finally, Darwin Nunez could be on the market this summer, but which European giants and Premier League teams should consider a swoop? That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. Okay, so we've got a really strong episode lined up today, and thankfully I've got Hayden van Brewer here. I mean, that makes it sound like I'm glad Neil isn't here, but I'm really glad to have you here, Hayden. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad that I'm here right now. I feel like it's after watching the games the last couple of days. I'm so excited that we get to break it down, talk about it, look forward to the next ones, and go from there. I mean, it was an awesome Champions League slate this week.
Yeah, you in our Slack last night, I was like, Hayden is like levitating off his sofa right now. You are having such a good time, and we do have to start, I think, with the Wednesday night game because, as interesting as our other topics are, Barcelona and Inter Milan served up maybe one of the greatest Champions League semis ever. It was so exciting. It was like you look at this game at the end and you're kind of like, there's like 2.3 XG combined in the game, six
Yeah,
goals. So what that means, bangers. And it was like non-stop bangers this game.
yeah, and it started out fast. And we talked on the last podcast I was
Mm.
on about how Inter could possibly try to take advantage of this Barca high line. And they did it 30 seconds into the game. They scored the fastest goal in Champions League
Yeah.
semifinal history. They came out and did that. We sort of talked about when would they pick their moments. They were planning on doing that right from the get-go. They
Mm.
came out flying. Marcus Thuram with a just fantastic skill on the back heel, and Inter took the lead right away, exploiting that Barca high line that we've talked about all year.
Yeah, and I mean, Thuram had a great finish on that goal. And he, I thought, was pretty fantastic all night in his link-up play. Whenever they were able to get Barella close to Thuram, it really felt like danger was there, especially with Dumfries as that third runner. And I mean, yes, two of their goals are off set pieces in this game, but it also felt like every time they had a little bit of patience in their build-up play, they were really able to break through. Well, I don't know. Let's go over the shape of the game first. So obviously they scored two of their first three shots on goal, go up 2-0, which is great because then we get to see Barcelona attack. And Lamine Yamal scores. I, this guy doesn't really need to announce himself, but if ever you could have a goal to announce yourself on the world stage as one of the greatest players in the world right now, it's got to be that. I mean, absolutely incredible goal. Then immediately skins a couple of guys and hits the bar with another effort straight after that. And before you know it, Barcelona are level again. It was incredibly exciting stuff, and there was no control at all, I thought.
Yeah, I think just to rewind a little bit, Inter really struggled to get out of the back. I mean, this is a
Mm.
team that's used to controlling the games in Italy, and Barca's pressure was insane. It felt like for a lot of the game, but even early on, after scoring these goals, they were just giving the ball back to Barcelona. They really
Yes.
weren't able to get out. Barca were able to just relentlessly press after the first goal. After the second goal, they kept coming. And Lamine Yamal, I think a lot's being made of his dribbling control, and Jamie Carragher made a point on how he manipulated the ball a little bit to open up the angle for the shot, something that Messi did throughout his career, dribbling
Mm.
in similar spaces. For me, I think the ability that Lamine Yamal has that I've almost never seen. Messi's the only player, but Yamal, he might even do it better, is his ability to generate so much power when he's passing, crossing the ball, obviously
Hmm.
that shot, with his foot almost right next to the ball. It's incredibly difficult to stop him because of his passing range, his vision, and his ability to move that ball quickly to another player from such a tight space. I mean, it's something that you hardly see among the very best of players. And I think he is a special, special talent. And yeah, again, in terms of a game of announcing himself, he's leading La Liga in assists as a 17-year-old still. And this game still felt like a level that like was even more exciting than that to some extent.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you've got it. Everybody afterwards was like, "Is Yamal the best player in the world?" And you think, I mean, he might be, but equally, he's not his team's most productive attacker this season. Raphinha gets another assist in this game. Pedri was really pulling the strings throughout and was pretty incredible too. But Yamal, they just found him again and again. Yamal was third for touches in this match. And when you're seeing the right winger getting that many touches in the game, then it really does paint a picture of how boxed in Inter were. And it just felt like, yeah, Inter were giving it back because it seemed like they wanted to go back to front so quickly. But because they had so many guys behind the ball, they really did struggle after that second goal to build properly. You know, they were just trying to play the hero pass immediately. And it was later in the second half, it felt like they came out with a little bit more patience. And so the first half, you end up with like 1.1 XG to 0.7 in Barcelona's favour. And then the second half is 0.4 apiece. And to me, in the second half, I was really, really impressed by Inter. I thought they were a little bit more patient. It felt like guys like Bastoni and Bisek had calmed down a little bit. And when they were building a bit more slowly and getting Barella a bit closer to Thuram, it was interesting. I also thought with the Mkhitaryan disallowed goal, bringing on Taremi in the second half, okay, they've got somebody who's much less mobile than Lautaro Martinez, but they did something similar to him, to what we talked about with Guirassy for Dortmund. They were stationing him offside. He starts in an offside position on that Mkhitaryan goal. Then as the ball goes wide, he becomes active again. And if he'd been the one to get to it and score rather than Mkhitaryan, I think it might have been onside. So it was very interesting the ways that they were using their natural tendency to go wide, which is a bit of a weakness for Barcelona, to kind of free up space in the middle, I guess.
Yeah, I think getting the halftime at level for Inter, which sounds crazy despite being 2 goals up, was really important to them. I think if they had gone behind, it would have been a really different game for Inzaghi and Inter and how they would have had to play it. I think coming in level, they were able to make 1 or 2 passes, which allowed Barella to either get up the field or out wide and give them a bit of an overload. You saw the overload for the cross that led to the Mkhitaryan disallowed goal, where they had a couple players in that wide channel and were able to get around the outside of Barcelona there. At the start of the game, Inter were just time wasting on every throw-in. Like, there was some real fear of Barcelona at the start that it looked like when they came out in the second half, that sort of, we're not going to be able to ever do anything against them, had sort of subsided. I mean, for how talented that Barcelona team is, again, I love the bit that Raphinha might win the Ballon d'Or and he's the 3rd best player on his team.
Sure, at best.
You know, I think, right. And I think there's something incredible that you have such a talented attacking group, Pedri, Yamal. I mean, Frankie de Jong still has such great ability in the middle of the field, but that, like Frankie de Jong wouldn't pass out to the left to Martin. He would not pass him the ball. You'd see him turn that down over and over to just give it to Lamine Yamal 1 versus 2. So it's interesting that a player like that, I think Szczęsny had been retired before Barca picked him up.
Sure.
That you have guys like that who are non-factors or not at the same level as these top guys, and Barca are still able to be so incredibly deadly, especially as the game went on. Pedri's crossing, in addition to Yamal's crossing, is an underrated part of his game. I think Pedri's a better long passer than people really recognize, because he's in this Barcelona team. He's a little bit of a smaller guy. He's a great ball striker. Plays the ball really well. Raphinha's tireless running really set up that goal for Ferran Torres. And I think, again, just to the original point, Inter getting in a halftime level and able to reset really gave them that chance where after they scored that 3rd goal, I think there was a real feeling that they might go on and win that game, that was the turning point and that they might be able to do it. And then a Barca corner happens. And how would you describe that moment?
Oh, my God. I screamed in the moment, and I felt incredibly bad for Jan Sommer, who I thought had a fantastic game. It's one of those ones that goes down as an own goal, but doesn't feel like it should be. But Raphinha had a few of these. Like, he had kind of a few sighters, and he had one just after. This one was a little bit more down the throat than the one he has afterwards that Sommer actually saves. But when you've got that degree of ball striking from that far out, and so many talented dribblers and so many good runners, then it's incredibly difficult for a team, even as defensively sophisticated as Inter, right, to pick and choose what they're going to give up. They can track all the runners, but then they're going to leave some of these free shots open. And honestly, you know, I think when Raphinha hits it as well as he does, like, you kind of just got to say, well, that's tough shit, guys. like sometimes this happens. But I was heartily impressed by Inter. I really was. And I'm glad as well that when Martinez went off and Taremi came on, we at the same time got some changeover in the Barca backline, which felt like it made it an even fight. We had Garcia come on and Araujo come on, and it felt like that meant that both teams were having to adjust, which was kind of interesting. And Szczęsny and Martin, it is fascinating to see a team operate at this high level. Szczęsny in this game, in his last season at Juventus, he had 20 actions outside the box all season across 35 90s. And he had 4 last night, just in that game alone. And watching him run out, it's like watching like a geography teacher jog out to do it. Like, he looks so tired. I really felt for him. He's just like really getting out to do it. But all these kind of, because the margins are so fine, like it feels like the gap between Barcelona playing the best football you've ever seen and them looking like a clown show is so slim. It just makes it incredible entertainment. I mean, it's really hard to talk about this game in a way that I think is full of sophisticated analysis, because afterwards you're just like pumped to be watching this level of football and in a game of this magnitude.
There were moments in this game that go by the wayside because of that Raphinha goal, because of, the Marcus Thuram right at the start. There are moments that go out. Pau Cubarsí sprinting all the way back to block a shot with a full stretch slide tackle at full speed was just an incredible display from another incredibly young, incredibly promising player. There were lots of really, really good moments in this game that, again, the disparity there is so funny. I mean, us at the Transfer Flow here, we have nothing against geography teachers, and we think that geography teachers can be great players as well. But we don't want them sweeping outside the area. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Just such an exciting game, and I think the point we're gonna make here a little bit is like the exceptional skill here and just some of the craziness. I mean, we're looking at incredible goals scored against a top keeper, a keeper that's been in the top 4 or 5 in goals saved above average in their shot stopping in the Champions League this season. Very experienced. I think we all have a lot of appreciation for Summer. And looking after the game, you're like, well, he conceded 3 goals. He conceded an own goal. And you're like, yeah, this guy was awesome in that game.
Yeah.
I wanted to do one other shout out here. Watching, again, we talked a little bit about it. We've been kind of going through a lot of players here, but I did not expect coming into this game going, wow, the best right-sided player in the world is Denzel Dumfries.
I know,
this is a player that I've followed for a long time. And Denzel Dumfries is the sort of guy, when he was playing for PSV and when he plays for the national team in the Netherlands, that gets a lot of stick. I mean, he's clearly very big, very athletic. He's not your sort of typical Dutch fullback that maybe changes their position, likes to get on the ball, stays home in the back 4, is very technical. This is a guy that likes to crash the boards at the back post, that likes to run up and down the wing, and doesn't really want to be isolated 1v1 against a top dribbler. And so I think it's one where when he went to Inter, some people maybe saw that as a big step up, but he's a perfect fit for this system. He gives them another option in the box. He's incredibly hardworking, and what he may lack at times in technical ability, which he didn't in this game, his technical prowess was really good. His understanding and awareness of the game and willingness to run for teammates is at the very highest level. And I think it was awesome to see him coming back from injury, showcase himself in sort of another coming out game. He was exceptional.
Yeah, I mean, Denzel Dumfries, I think, is such a useful big game player. Like, he often seems to be at his best in these kind of big games. And he had that period, I guess, it must have been under Van Gaal or something. He had a good stretch for the Netherlands as well, in a system that suited him.
Also, when they were playing that back 3 with wing backs and didn't have a center forward, so he was that sort of presence to either head things back across to Memphis and players like that, or to even just go himself. He provided that, and so Inter recognizing that they could utilize that. Awesome.
I think he's, every time I hear Dumfries linked to a move, because he'd been linked to like Manchester United and stuff, you just think like, this Inter team is absolutely the best football team that Denzel Dumfries could play for. And this is a team that could win the Champions League, but like, it's a really specific role. It's a team that has an incredibly skilled passer at left wing back and their best defensive passer at left centre back. They've got lots of kind of left side passing bias. So having a right side runner makes a lot of sense. But yeah, he was fantastic in this game. He led the team in box touches. He led the team in progressive receptions, and he was that outlet again and again. He ended up with 0.6 expected goals and assists and completed both of his dribbles. I think that in the second leg, Barcelona are going to be scared of him. And the simple fact is, when it comes to things like set pieces, they can train them better. They can train them better, though I'm not sure they can train them better in the next week. But I don't know if they actually can do much about the Inter set pieces at this stage. Because not only did Inter score 2 goals from set pieces, but certainly the second one they scored, their third goal of the night, was like devastatingly easy. Dumfries goes over 2 guys and just nods it in. And I thought, if we can't defend this, I'm not sure. But the positive thing is, because it's so evenly balanced, both these teams will go to the San Siro pretty confident that they can hurt the other team.
Yes, and again, I don't know. This is a weird ripple of the game, and it's a bit circular. Both teams are doing it down the
Mm,
right-hand side. We'll see if they're able to limit each other in that way, because it felt like Barca going down the right with Koundé and Yamal and Pedri often in that space. That was really the overload for Barcelona, and then the outlet was on the other side for Dumfries going the other way. That's going to be a really interesting one for me, especially we'll have to see what the shape of this Barcelona backline is. I think that's really interesting. I think Ferran Torres stepped in as a suitable replacement for Lewandowski. That the what they still,
sure.
I think they prefer to have Lewandowski in the team. I think that's obvious, but I think the drop off there was not as high as when you start to see
Yeah.
the backline for Barcelona get chopped and changed a bit. I think that's going to be a really interesting one, because I think Inter in that second half realized there are ways that we can have a lot more success, and
Mm.
especially playing at home. Playing at home in the San Siro before they change that stadium is going to be a really, really intense atmosphere. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this next game. I think it's going to be really, really exciting.
Yeah, I'm pumped for this one. Should we move on then to Arsenal PSG, which was it was less like attention grabbingly incredible, but it was a really exciting game in a totally different way. Obviously, PSG just roar out of the blocks, and the first 25 minutes, Arsenal looked scared. Like, PSG were all over them. Arsenal couldn't win a duel. PSG had 72% of the ball, and they scored that early goal. And to be honest, that early goal, it's not like a big chance. It's like just a great move. That thing we talked about with Mendes playing the late ball, Dembele dropping into midfield, pass it out wide, and then he gets on the end and finishes it. It's a fantastic goal. But even leaving that goal aside, like, Arsenal just couldn't get out. Arsenal looked like they had no idea what to do. And then the game changed about 25 minutes in. And between 25 minutes and 70 minutes, PSG had 1 shot and Arsenal had 7. PSG had 0.1 XG and Arsenal had 1.5. Probably more like about 1.1, because I think, at least one of those Martinelli chances was getting pulled back for offside if it gone in. But you were talking before this about how exciting it was to watch these high-level players problem solve on the fly. And that is really what it felt like, right? Like, about 25 minutes in, suddenly I was like, oh, stuff is happening. Like, guys, you had Saka drifting over to the left and Timber in the middle and
Yeah.
Lewis Skelly in the middle and Saliba breaking through the center. And I was just like, what? Okay, like, this felt like, oh, this is why you recruit smart players.
Yeah, I think first off, like we mentioned it with that Marcus Thuram goal, we're gonna say it here with that Dembele goal. It's there's not really a better feeling if
Mm.
you're a person that yaps a lot about soccer to see like the
Sure.
thing that you say happen like not just in the game, but like immediately in the game. It's so like it just feels so good when that happens. But yes, I think this Arsenal team PSG, we know how talented they are technically.
Mhm.
This is a team that has a lot of ability. But I think this Arsenal team, part of what we saw in this game that they maybe don't get credit for in the Premier League, where they're a big team, they're expected to win a lot of
Mm.
games. This is a really resilient group. This is an intelligent group that can problem solve on the field, that can change to play different ways. They're very resilient. And we mentioned it before. Saka maybe would have wanted a bit more space and a few more opportunities to come inside, to dribble, to create in there than he got throughout the game. But this is a team that can hurt you constantly and is willing to be patient, is willing to bunker in and sit low when they need to and change. I think that's a
Mm,
really a testament of a good team. Are you flexible? Can you recognize what's happening and not panic and change and make those adjustments? And Arsenal really did that. I think we talked a little bit before the podcast, like Arsenal all year has been one of the best set piece teams in Europe. They love that set piece where they
sure,
put it right on top of the goalkeeper into the 6 yard box, into the chaos, Declan Rice whipping the ball in. And
sure.
Donnarumma is a guy that just grabs those for fun. Donnarumma is one of the most difficult to do that against. And so Arsenal had to adapt in that way. They had to adapt in how they were going to get out of the back against PSG's press. And they were able to do that. And I think that's the really thing. The really interesting thing in this game is the tactical changes and stages of this game as it evolved, because we're going to see more in that in the second game as time ticks down and teams need to get goals to advance. We're going to see that pressure get ratcheted up. That's going to be really interesting. And I think it's important here not to get sucked into the narrative, the sort of transfer stuff. Are
Mm-hmm.
Arsenal going to sign Gyökeres, or what's going to happen with that? Because sure, I think you want to have different ways of attacking, having a strong center forward or something like that as a different option, as a different look. But I don't think that's why Arsenal didn't score in this game. I think Arsenal set themselves up to be resilient, to not concede a lot of chances, and gave themselves a number of good opportunities. And Donnarumma steps up, I think, a little bit in this game. He shows himself really well. And if this game plays out the same way in Paris, I think there's a very good chance that
Mm-hmm.
Arsenal take it or we head to extra time.
Partially, our perception is altered by the stuff that gets chalked off and the stuff that doesn't, right? So then you have these two chances for PSG late on when Barcola goes through and Ramos goes through, and I think probably it looked like both of those were offside as well. So we end up with this picture at the end of the shots and the expected goals where Arsenal kind of edged the XG, but like probably had considerably less than they looked like they had, and PSG looked very dominant at different stages, but without really putting up big chances. So that made it. So that makes it, yeah, I think a bit more finely poised than maybe some people would like to be, because certainly the narrative in the UK has been that Arsenal got housed in this game. And it was interesting. It kind of reminded me of the Liverpool match at the Parc des Princes, where you had the whole way through, they were saying, Liverpool are under the cosh here, even during a period where I thought Liverpool looked quite dangerous, until, of course, Liverpool end up winning. And then suddenly the narrative has to change and it's Liverpool bedded in and they were really tough and resilient. In this game, I think that
Yeah.
maybe that was kind of what did happen, but the narrative at the end is they lost 1-0, and so it's it's one of those ones that I think that the stats tell you a bit more, but then some of the stats as well, you kind of need to know what you're doing to understand what's really going on with them. I'd like to talk about what made the change, when Arsenal started to come back into it, because it did feel, one thing was that PSG either made a tactical switch they'd pre-planned, or they lost their nerve a little bit, right? Because in the early stages, they were drawing Arsenal onto them, delaying passes, and then hitting those passes behind the press. After about 20 minutes, they start going long a bit more, and you just can't really go long against this Arsenal setup. Like, there are too many enormous guys in there. But also, it felt like we saw some freer positioning from Arsenal's players, right? We saw Saka drift over to the left. The Martinelli big chance where he runs in behind is because Lewis Skelly bursts through midfield and then plays a pass in between the right back and the right centre back. What did you see going on in this game that you thought was an interesting adjustment?
So I think that freedom that you're talking about here is really important. That's what we're talking about in terms of the flexible nature of Arsenal's fullbacks to adjust their positions and do different things. Again, Urian Timber
Mm,
is a player that's played as a center back, as a midfielder. Lewis Skelly on the other side is a guy that came
yeah.
through as a midfielder in the academy. And I think Martinelli, in the same way that we've talked about Raphinha's ability to threaten and run in behind, that when he's willing to do that, I think that opens up things in a really different way. The matchup that I think was most important in this game is in the midfield, and it's how I would say it's twofold. It's both how Arsenal decided to press Vitinha and João Neves. João Neves coming off at the end of the game because he was tired is something that I don't think I've seen really this year, and is a testament to how Arsenal press, and is also part of how Arsenal move things around. I think Arsenal, when they're able to not just play into midfield and then sort of try to overload on one side, switch the play, and do that kind of thing, when they're able to keep their midfield narrow and compact and get the ball directly to a winger, whether that's a side center back or whether that's a fullback coming down, the other fullback
Mm,
high, winger rotating in, something like that. I think when they're able to play directly to winger and get the ball into Saka's feet in those half spaces, or when Martinelli comes down instead of stretching, I think that's what opens things up, because it prevents PSG's midfield from
yeah,
being the aggressive little pest that they want to be. They want to nick the ball off you. They want to get you dribbling backwards and sideways because they're so quick. And I think when Arsenal is able to go, okay, we don't need to just play in here and have our normal patterns. We can bypass and then go around and force their midfield to run up and then all the way back. I think that was that's a piece of it that I think, again, it cumulatively adds up on those midfielders. They're going to be less likely to press and jump forward if they feel
mm,
like, well, the ball's going past and we're not winning it. Our defenders aren't challenging and winning that ball, and then we have to run all the way back.
sure.
I'm not going to go press if I then have to run all the way back, right? So I think that is part of what opened it up. And again, that's when I mentioned this patience from Arsenal. That's not an easy thing. That doesn't happen one time. That doesn't happen two times, and these guys will give up their pressing. It has to happen over and over again and lead to some level of
That's really
fatigue or
interesting. Yeah, of
frustration
course. I
to
guess
cause that change.
you're doing something in the hope that you'll bait. They'll notice it and be baited into doing something, and then you can exploit that. It did feel like that kind of happened. You know, the end of the first half, they were starting to get chances, Arsenal, and then it meant that at the beginning of the second half, PSG had come out and tried to adjust to the way that Arsenal were playing. And then suddenly they were able to create a different sort of chance where you get Trossard running into the space vacated by a fullback, and gets one of the other big chances, which, you know, Donnarumma gets a great save on. It was absolutely fantastic.
Makes a
There
great
are a
save.
couple of sad things about this match, though, I think, right? Like, one is, if you look at the other game, the coaches rotated pretty aggressively. Like, Inter made all their changes. They made a bunch of them early on, you know, taking off DiMarco, bringing on Augusto, stuff like that. Some of them forced, Martinez for Taremi. But in this match, Arsenal just simply didn't really have many options. They brought on a kind of half-fit White because Timber hurt himself. They brought on Nwaneri later on. How can Arteta try and figure out ways to change things when he clearly doesn't really trust his bench options because he's got a bunch of kids there? I mean, it does feel like you're stuck here, right? Because you can either reduce the raw quality of your team by bringing on like worse players, more inexperienced players, but if you keep on the more experienced guys, then you're losing energy. And in a game like this, it did just feel like in the last 20 minutes, as Arsenal lost energy, PSG sank deeper. And then in that last 20 minutes, PSG do create, whether they're offside or not, a couple of chances. Arsenal created nothing.
Yeah, I think they
Sure.
miss
Hmm.
they miss Kai Havertz a little bit. I think Kai Havertz is a guy that if he starts, he can change his position. He is such an intelligent player that can do so many things well. Sometimes gets a little bit of slack for his finishing and things like that, but he is a player that I think Arteta loves having in the team because he allows them to do different things because he can just do it himself. I think there's a question a little bit. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't think Merino had a bad game. I think Merino actually offered a lot here, but I do think like Jorginho is a guy that has been at Arsenal, and I think at least for me, I kind of thought he would
Hmm.
get used a lot more rotationally in games where Arsenal wanted to use the ball, where they felt like if he was partnered with Rice, that they could move Rice higher and they could almost play with a single pivot in there.
Mm,
That hasn't really happened, and sometimes I wonder like if with Marino they've gone with a
sure.
little bit more of the same. And if there's sometimes the need for a different midfield profile in there, I'm again, maybe I'm biased. I'm wearing my Ajax jersey. Maybe there's times where I think like when Timber went
Sure.
to Arsenal, I thought
Hmm.
he'd maybe get some looks in midfield. And maybe he could be a guy that provides some of that. He looks good as a fullback that inverts inside and is able to be very comfortable in those spaces. So I think there's a little bit of a question there of does Arsenal need just a little bit of a different profile? I mean, Nwaneri coming on, he's a really exciting talent, but I think he offers a lot of what Arsenal get from their wingers already. It's a little bit of, is there
Mm,
room for a different profile in the midfield to mix things up that other people can play off of in a different way? I think so much of high level football is that, like, outside of maybe Messi in the very, very top of the top, it's not just about what you do. And maybe Messi is a good example of this. It's about how many people you can affect positively. Like, if you're a guy and you can beat someone off the dribble, that's great. But if you're a guy that can
hmm
bring multiple teammates into the game, that's really, really special. If you're a center back that defends in a way that helps your teammates, that's
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
really
I
impactful.
think I think we're likely to see Merino maybe play as a centre forward next week, just because Partey will be back from suspension, and so I imagine that then he'll come into midfield, which probably will help this, and also maybe help that zone that we saw Dembele dropping into. Um, so that's the other thing about this. It would also be good if Arsenal got Calafiori back. I think like that's a different kind of problem for other teams, and then you might see
Yes,
Lewis Skelly go into
100%.
midfield, for example. So there are lots of things that could happen between now and next week. The other question, of course, after the game is what's going on with Ousmane Dembele. He was withdrawn early in the game. They had to use Doué kind of in that role, and it looks like it's a hamstring issue. We just don't know quite how severe it is yet. If he's missing for the second leg, would you expect that Luis Enrique just rolls with Doué kind of playing a similar role, or do you think he tries a totally different thing? Because they can try and keep the ball all game and see how that goes, but they're going to have to be a bit more proactive, you'd imagine.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. I think that's my gut feeling is they would start with something like Doué instead
Hmm
of bringing on Gonzalo Ramos right from the start, and that there would be some expectation that Gonzalo Ramos, if they're still leading, would be a player available for the last maybe 20 minutes of the game to provide them an you know a bit more of a traditional center forward profile and a guy with fresh legs who can run the channels and maybe pick up some loose balls or something like that. I think I would probably still expect to see them try to load that front line with
hmm hmm
Barcola, Kvaratskhelia, Doué, these kind of dribblers that can vary their positions, that are intelligent, quick, have the ability to stretch in behind and get the ball to feet. I think that's really what Luis Enrique loves in this team, is that they have so much of that individual ability and they're balanced across the front
Yeah.
line. And again, we talked about that before the game. I don't know if any of the other players have the timing and the
No.
awareness to drop in and do the things that Dembele does, but I think that they will, if Dembele is out, then they will try to do some similar things with someone else. I would expect them to start doing that in a similar way and sort of look at the game as, we don't know what the first 60 minutes are going to be. We want to get another goal. We want to at first not concede a dangerous chance or something like that, but we're going to try to manage the game. And part of managing the game is being able to possess the
hmm
ball out of the
hmm
back, invite Arsenal onto us, and then exploit the space. That I think clearly is part of how this PSG team plays Champions League games against top opposition. That won't change for the start of the game. Come the end of the game, depending on the situation with the score and things like that, we could see a little bit of an adjustment in that way.
hmm the things are poised really beautifully. Like it's really nice that neither one of these ties is beyond either of the teams involved. Unfortunately, Hayden, you're not going to be here for the second round of fixtures next week. That's Neil's turn, but I get to do it. That's the main thing. So I will be stealing your ideas in the Slack, I think. But shall we move on then from Champions League football? As sad as it is to do so, and shall we talk about an interesting transfer rumor that we've got coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to put an end on it, yeah, gutted to miss it, but all four
Yeah.
teams I think showed themselves really well. I think there were times in both games where the feeling was, wow, this team could really step on the gas and take it, and then the other team punched back and was able to make adjustments and change, and that's part of what makes this so exciting. Both games are really poised, and I can't wait to watch this next week. Yeah, let's dig into some transfers. I think
Great.
that's
So,
always one of the best bits.
Darwin Nunez is the player that we're talking about today. It looks like he's on the market. Now, how much faith you want to put in rumors from certain sources is kind of up to you. But a couple of people have reported that Liverpool could be willing to let him go for as little as £38 million this summer. That sounds a little bit low to me, but the exciting thing about a price point like that is that it would bring a load of teams into contention for him who you'd have expected to be priced out. Darwin Nunez has had a bit of a weird season under Slot, right, Hayden? Like, clearly he's just not a profile that Slot likes, but also we've seen what's good about Nunez kind of curtailed playing in this more conservative system, bar his pressing, which is still phenomenal.
Yeah, I think he's a tricky one. I think the Gegen pressing era was
Sure.
maybe a little bit 6 or 7 years ago, where it felt like teams were just trying to press more and more and more. And Darwin is really a special guy. There's not many players. Usually, players are sort of sprinters and they're fast, but then they don't have the endurance to maybe maintain that or cover lots of ground, or vice versa. They can cover lots of ground, but they don't have that peak explosiveness. And Nunez is a guy that covers a lot of ground and is incredibly fast and powerful. That is a really unique profile. You can see why teams are so excited about him. The question is, he's got some good technical ability. It's not that he's athletic but not technical. He played as a winger at Benfica. He's got some ability to dribble past people, to maneuver the ball. There's some questions of when he's moving at full speed, he's getting on the ends of things that other people wouldn't get, but then he doesn't have sort of the composure to finish them off in terms of chances. Maybe at times doesn't use his body as well as he can in sort of build up play to link up play and be that sort of outlet. And so there's a few questions here. And I think the challenge is this is a player that clearly, I mean, deservedly so, is on some big wages and has a ton of potential. You can see the things that he does well, he does really, really well. And so we're talking a little bit about who are the teams that can afford him and can take him into the team, but then also who are the teams that could be most likely to utilize his skill set and take advantage of that. And some of those teams, hopefully with the lower price point, that could really use him and allow him to excel. Again, we talked about Dumfries earlier. Is Inter the best team that he can play on that utilizes his skills in a great way? I think for you and I, we're hoping that Darwin ends up on a team like that. And so maybe this is a good point to start, is Atletico Madrid or maybe Atalanta as two places that could be exciting destinations for him.
Yeah, at Atletico Madrid, I mean, it does feel like they've got really good, or they've got better lately at understanding the kind of player they should be going for. You know, when you think back to like the Thomas Lemar days, you think, what were they thinking here? But then Gallagher, Alvarez, and if they were to go for Nunez, having been linked to him, that does feel like it's of a piece with this particular style of recruitment. And as a pair with Alvarez, it feels like a pretty complete front line. Both these guys are super athletic. Alvarez is more the passer, interchanger, carrier, and Nunez is more the runner. But as you say, he can do a bit of that. And he is an enormous physical mismatch for so many defenders. He gets shots. He gets high value shots. I think that Simeone would love him. Atalanta's a bit of an interesting one. So it feels like they've played lots of different shapes in the past in their front line. Is this in your mind with a view to Lookman going and he would play alongside Retegui? Or is it more if they were to sell Retegui, they could replace him with Nunez? What's your thought there?
I think with the Atalanta one, there's a little bit of a feeling that whether that front group is let's just call it a 3-4-3 with a
Yeah.
sort of 2 and 1, or whether it's the other way around, that Nunez can kind of play in both those shapes. He can play as that center forward, or he could play right off of Retegui or something like that. I think with Atalanta, it makes a lot of sense, and you can see those options. There's also a part of me with the Atletico Madrid one that Antoine Griezmann has re-signed, and Darwin Nunez, I would say with Liverpool, he didn't really get a chance to play with like an out-and-out playmaker, creator, kind of number 10 type that Griezmann is. And there's a part of me that wonders, like, is that the guy that can really unlock it for him? Whereas Atalanta, maybe, again, it feels like he could just slot into that team in a couple different places. They'd try it out. With Atalanta, sometimes it feels like how they fit in offensively is less important than how they fit in defensively in terms of what players can bring. And I think that's maybe, it's tough to know right off the bat. Again, if Lookman does go, he's a different profile than Lookman, but how does he slot in defensively into the rest of the group? That's what would make that choice. But for both these teams, I think there's a real way of seeing how he fits in. Again, it comes down a little bit to finances, or if that's a risk that they would be willing to take in that regard. I think there's a couple teams that I flagged up that would be really interesting for him to look at, but maybe don't have that squad flexibility or have a player in that position. And some of those teams are Real Betis,
Mhm.
that signed Cucho Hernandez out of MLS recently for a pretty decent fee. Bournemouth, who signed Evan Nielsen on the back of the Dominic Solanke transfer. And at Monaco have both Mika Birith, who we've talked about in the newsletter, but they
Mhm.
also have Folarin Balogun still. So they have a couple of striker options. All of these teams are a bit more front-footed. They like to press. You can see a way that Darwin could be in these teams, but they'd maybe have to move a player or move things around to be able to bring him in. And so even though it'd be exciting to see him there, it maybe isn't one that's going to happen with the timeline.
No, I mean, well, I suppose there's a possibility that Biereth could go very quickly. He's in such hot form now that if somebody comes in with big money for him, you would be tempted as Monaco to take it because his stock's so high. On the other hand, maybe they think if he does this for a full season, where's his price going to be next year? Because he's 22. I don't know if he qualifies as homegrown, having come through the Arsenal Academy. He might do. I suspect he doesn't, but that would be an interesting factor too. But there's the part of me that wants him to go to a team that he doesn't obviously fit, where he makes them a bit more interesting. So Kim has been talking in the newsletter about him for Arsenal. Certainly at Arsenal, there are lots of times where it feels like having this player who's gambling in the box a little bit more would make them more dangerous. Having a bit more chaos in the final third would make Arsenal a scarier proposition, I think, because while sometimes players like Saka and Odegaard can just do to you what they want to do to you, you do know what they want to do to you. Whereas Darwin Nunez is just a bit more of a goal out of nothing type guy. Similarly, I was thinking about Aston Villa. I don't think that Emery would like him. We were saying this off air, but they let Duran go in January, and Duran was meant to be the Watkins succession plan, right? Watkins is now at the tail end of his 20s. He's been linked away to Arsenal. He's been linked away to Manchester United. Homegrown, big fees they've been talking about, 50, 60 million. I don't know how real those are. But if you could get that kind of money for Watkins, swapping him for a 25-year-old Nunez plus a little bit of cash, I do think, again, would make Villa a bit more interesting. You can imagine a world if you added to an Emery team the ability to go from back to front really, really quickly. Whether it's through Tielemans or if they keep Asensio, whoever, if they can create that connection between the playmaking guy and Nunez, they could be incredibly dangerous in a way that we haven't really, in a way that Emery has rarely had. He's rarely had that real top end talent at a team that will also accept his more conservative tendencies.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the Arsenal one, the thing that maybe gets lost with Nunez is that I think Nunez would fit probably pretty well with a personality like Arteta. He's a guy that will work really hard, has that kind of fiery battle in him
Sure, yeah.
that I think Arteta really likes. Arteta likes guys that are no nonsense, that are aggressive. Again, Arteta is obviously a Spanish
Sure.
coach, but he also learned under David Moyes. I think there's always that in the back of my mind, and I think there's some real ways that he could fit there. And also, they might be scared of taking that risk and think he might not be the striker. If we're going to go for a real center forward, we might want someone even at a higher price point. I think for Aston Villa, if they choose not to go with Marcus Rashford, the
Yeah.
Marcus Rashford fee I think is supposed to be about 40 million. That's essentially what we're talking about here with Darwin Nunez in terms of a player that I think a lot of what we've seen recently is Rashford, and we've seen Asensio come into the team, guys that are great dribblers, have great ball control, but they also signed Daniel Malin. I would love to see a project that has Daniel Malin, Darwin Nunez, Leon Bailey, some real speed and some real aggression that gives them a different look, especially if they're trying to. We saw them sit in against PSG in the Champions League, and if they had an option like that as a counterpunch physically, that could be an interesting look. Part of me still feels like he's a better fit maybe for Arteta than he is for Unai Emery. I think if we're throwing out some interesting projects, again, we're talking about teams that need to have enough money here, and these are maybe a little bit more of a stretch, but Leeds United have just been promoted out of the championship. They've got guys like Dan James, Brendan Aronson, Willie Gnonto,
Hmm.
possibly if they make the Manor Solomon deal permanent, a lot of quick, fast guys that can whip in early balls,
Yeah.
that will press with a striker like Nunez. That could be really appealing. Joel Pirot has been the striker there who's played as more of a target, pivot, maybe not as mobile, maybe not as high pressing. Nunez would be
Hmm.
a big bit of their promotion kitty, to say it. So it's maybe a bit more of a stretch, but that could be a really exciting one. And again, Leeds are a club with a lot of reputation who I think, having already had Bielsa, could take to a personality like Darwin. I had one other one, and I think Darwin, despite being this sort of unusual profile, it is to some
Yeah.
extent, he's a little bit of an analytics darling, right? He's a guy that can create shots. He creates chaos. He makes stuff happen. He's an ingredient. He's different, unique, and you can see the potential and the excitement there. Como in
That's
Italy under
interesting.
Fabregas are a more high pressing team in Italy. They're a team that you wonder if, again, they've kept themselves up this year. If Fabregas is staying, if more investment keeps coming into that club, would that be a really interesting one for a guy like Darwin to add a bit of sparkle and maybe push them up? I mean, I think the top of that Italian table is so tight. The teams are close together. But could Como join that battle in the same way that we've seen maybe teams like Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, and Brighton do in the Premier League if they added a kind of player that maybe that actually fits? Again, higher price point and things like that could be a little nervy. But I don't
Mm.
know. Those are a few teams that are maybe a bit more of a stretch. But I was thinking, like, I could kind of picture it. It could be a really exciting risk if they were willing to take it.
And they've got, they've got Diao and they've got Paz, but Nico Paz has been linked away quite a lot. And you think if he were to go, there'd be a big crater in
Right.
their shots. Like, I mean, that guy's shot selection is not amazing, but his shot numbers really
Right.
are. So if you could fill that with Darwin, he will get those shots for you. I really like the Leeds shout. We've had a lot of questions recently about what teams can do to try and stay up in the Premier League now, because we've obviously seen the promoted teams go straight back down, and it does feel at times like the Premier League is becoming a closed shop. This Leeds team is as good as any team we've ever seen promoted from the Championship. You drop Darwin Nunez into it instead of Piru, and you think he could get you 15 goals easily, and that could be the difference. Leeds, I think, have got a real shot at coming up and establishing themselves, especially because it feels like the Premier League has moved away. Everybody presses quite a bit, but very few teams are pressing insanely. It feels like the league's in a bit of kind of tactical flux where maybe if you get the edge just right, you can really soar up. So I don't know, putting Nunez in there could make them super dangerous, both as a team that uses the press as a playmaker and just a guy who thwacks everything really, really hard with both feet. I really want him to go. He
Yeah.
feels like, look, I know that Moneyball gets talked about a lot, but he does feel like that kind of conversation in Moneyball, right? Of like, this guy isn't, maybe he's not so elegant, maybe he's not the guy who you look at and think, okay, this is the way football should be played. It's like the most beautiful style, but he's just super effective. He just does the stuff he does really well.
Yeah. No, I think so. And that's sort of my point here in throwing out teams like Leeds and Como, where even a Bournemouth, where it's
Mm,
not necessarily the destination that you see a young player coming out of Liverpool with so much potential and hype and things like that. Usually, you'd expect them to maybe land at more of a Atalanta or a Monaco, a team that's playing in the Champions League regularly
mm,
and the best stylistic fit of those teams. But I think, like, if there's a team that's willing to take a little bit of a risk here and can get that fit just right, I think we'd love to see Darwin be the main man for a team and really has the potential more than almost any player that could be available in
mm.
this window to really ignite something, to make a team really exciting. And yeah, this was a really good Leeds team. This is a team that
Yeah.
may still not win the title, by the way, which is insane. But this is a really good Leeds team that you have to you'd love to see them keep a lot of the group together, and maybe because that team has been so good and stable in the championship, again, very high pressing. They throw numbers forward. Bogle and Firpo
Hmm.
down the sides are very high. They might have to adjust some of that, but those guys are really good athletes. And I think maybe can even adjust in their own game, they're able to keep a lot of the group together, then maybe this is a team that's poised to take one or two shots that could put them over the line, that could make them really exciting. And you
Yeah.
wonder if
Hmm.
Wolves were to lose Cunha or something like that, does that really give Leeds the chance to go ahead of a team like that? I think, we're not expecting necessarily United and Spurs to be right down there again, but I think there's a few teams in there that if they're looking at this Leeds team coming up and they see them add a Darwin Nunez, maybe a European level center back to the
Yeah.
group, they'd be like, that team has a lot going for it right now. And again, Ellen Road and that environment there gives Leeds every chance if they were to take a risk like Darwin. I think Leeds might be a team that comes up a bit more frequently in the
Sure.
podcast and the newsletter come the summer. I think they're a team that after the sort of fanfare of the season ends, people are going to be looking at like, well, what is this team thinking about coming into next year?
I completely agree with you. I think if I were West Ham, and they went and got Evan Ferguson in January, which was a bit of a gamble, which, nothing's come of. And then you're looking at strikers in the summer and you see one of your rivals, a team coming up from the championship, adding Nunez. This is scary stuff. We're going to talk about him a lot, I think, as the summer goes on. It's a thin striker market, but everybody wants one. And getting the guy, okay, is maybe someone like Isak is the most rounded striker on the market, if he's on the market, which I suspect he isn't. But if you get the guy who's just the right fit for your team, and Darwin Nunez is peak age and has put up numbers in the Premier League and is a battler, there's a lot to commend him. I think that brings us to the end for this week's episode. Hayden, where can people find you before we see you again on the podcast? By which time we'll have our Champions League finalists in place.
Yeah. I'm H. Van Brewer on Blue Sky, mostly talking about the same stuff that we're doing here. And yeah, no, I mean, I really enjoyed this one. I think I like you were saying, coming into this, I was like, I can't wait to get you
Yeah.
on air and talk about some of these things, because it was such a good slate of games. And also Darwin Nunez is just such an exciting one to enter the market. Again, maybe Isak isn't available. Maybe Gyökeres is just his agent trying to get that big payday again. But Darwin Nunez, it feels like, is very much available, and it will be very exciting to see where he ends up. We want to see him playing football regularly. We talked about Osimhen before and wanting to see him play. Nunez is another guy where it's like, let's get these guys out there and see what they can do.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you so much for being here, Hayden. It's super fun to talk about these Champions League games with you. And thank you to everybody listening or watching for being here as well. If you've got questions about teams, about players that you would like us to cover, then please do drop them in the comments. We go through them all, including the ones for Man Down. You can send us those as well. We will catch you next week, where we will be bringing you the Liverpool rebuild. God knows if that's going to be one installment or two, but there's a lot of work to be done. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.